Hi, this is the first video in a series I want to do about actually designing a small pipe chanter. I've taught you on various YouTube videos how to make a chanter itself, but to my dimensions, but you may want to make something to different dimensions. I started in 1983, I think it was, making my first Leicestershire small pipe chanter, and I really didn't know the daunting amount of variables there are in making a chanter that plays in tune. You have to know the length of the bore, the inside dimensions of the bore, the outside dimensions, and then there's the reed and the hole positions, and I was very naive in those days, but very persistent, and I ended up with a design now which is very, very consistent. I used, as my starting point, I used a Scottish small pipe chanter in D that had been developed by the Scottish maker Jimmy Wilson, and he used a bassoon reed, and so I started off making, because I knew nothing about making reeds in those days, using a bassoon reed, which it worked okay, but it wasn't very consistent. It wasn't really suitable, but at least that allowed me to develop the chanter without having to develop a reed at the same time. All I knew was that the English scale would want a semitone at the bottom, leading note, and at the top as well, and the Scottish scale was a flattened one, so that was the only difference to the outside dimension. I knew it was going to be shorter. So I made a reamer, I made a drill bit, and so I had the inside dimensions roughly correct, and then I turned the outside of the chanter, and that was roughly correct. And then I plugged in a bassoon reed, and then the fun actually began. And I searched in a box, and I've actually found my first chanter, because I always number the chanters. This is number 1, and it is a hideous example of what the sort of thing I was going through. I was blocking up, I was drilling the holes roughly where Jimmy had them, and then finding if it was too flat I'd want to move it up, so I'd carve it up a bit and then put beeswax underneath, and holes went up and down, so that these ghastly gaps there. I didn't really know what I was doing. Also, I wasn't much of a piper in those days, so when I was playing, I wasn't playing at very consistent pressure. Somehow I came to some kind of idea about where the holes should be, and so I made my second chanter, same inside bore, same outside bore, and I've dug out also from this same box the second set of pipes, first set of pipes I ever made. This is chanter number 2, and you can see if you compare the two, I've got hole positions a bit better, and that's what I worked from. Every time I made another chanter, I tried to get the holes positions the same, and slowly, bit by bit, I got to a consistent design. This has never been seen in public, by the way, so don't tell anyone about this, because it's pretty hideous. Well, it's an excellent example of something pretty hideous. I'm 43 years older now, and hopefully wiser, and I'm still learning stuff. I'm not saying I know it all, but when you're designing a chanter, it's important to have 3 or 4 consistent reeds, because you don't want to design the finger holes to work with one reed only to find it was a different kind of reed that behaves slightly differently. And yeah, you just have to work away at it. So I'm going to show you some of the techniques and some of the understandings. This is not theoretical at all. This is very, very practical. Okay. Right, so how do you get your hole positions? They've got to be comfortable, so your fingers aren't pressed together. And the first thing you need to know, which is fairly obvious, is the higher hole goes, the higher the note it will play. Conversely, the lower it will play. You have to be clear when you're tuning a chanter what fingering system you're going to use on the chanter, because on covered fingering, which I favour, you only have one finger off at any time, which does mean the bore further down does still have an effect on the note. So try the A. So if you're playing open fingering, it's not, the bottom of the bore doesn't have such an effect on it. So that's one thing you have to hold in your mind. Also, the comfort issue. This hole, for example, really the F sharp would like to be acoustically somewhere up there, but it just wouldn't be comfortable having the G and the F sharp so close together. So you can reposition the hole, but position it, make it bigger. So that will play the same note as if I blocked that up and drilled a hole about there. Likewise, if you want to move this note higher for some reason, you could drill a hole higher, but a much smaller hole. The smaller the hole, it's a compromise. If you did drill a smaller hole there, it would work, but the smaller and smaller the hole you make, the more it stifles the tone and eventually the volume. So there's all the time there's a compromise between all these things. Right, another technique that is used is undercutting, which means you leave the hole in exactly the same place. It looks just the same. So this is a cross section, not terribly wonderful, but that's the reed end, and there is one of your finger holes. And what you do is you get in and you remove as much as you can without affecting the actual size of the hole. So that's called undercutting, and there are all sorts of different ways of doing it. You can use a file, but the file's kind of using in the wrong direction. This is a riffler file, and I've developed something which I call Goodacre's razor, which I'll do a whole video about how to make one, but it's basically a hook that shaves stuff off there, and that raises the tone. You can also use it a little bit on the bottom of the hole as well. It's not going to affect your note so much, but it can sweeten the tone a little bit. So that's something that's doing. So that's undercutting. Of course, the other way of doing fine tuning is reducing the size, either by putting a little bit of tape on a hole just over the top, which can lower the tone just fractionally, and once you're clear you want to lower it, you can then, I use a soldering iron with wax and just drip a little bit of wax in the top. That works so far, but eventually it will stifle the sound. I'll show you more about that in a later video anyway. I think the easiest way to show you about how all these techniques work in practice is to read up one of my Leicestershire Smallpipe chanters. The holes are in a fairly the same position as they should be, but they all need slight adjustment. The first thing you're going to need is an electronic tuner. Got one there. You need something for enlarging the holes. Now, I'm in deference to, or in memory of the great rambling Sid Rumpo, I call these my looming pins. They're actually watchmakers' brooches, which are hexagonal, I think, reamers that just go inside the hole, and you can just ream out the hole. They have sharp edges there, and you can just enlarge holes very fractionally with that. So those are my looming pins. Also have a little countersink there, which takes the rough edges after I've drilled a hole, and another one which sort of blunt-headed one there. So those are my looming pins. You'll need a Goodacre's razor, which is a tool I've invented, and I'll do another video about exactly how you make one, but it's basically a little chisel, upward chisel, so you can get it into a hole and then undercut there. More about that on another video. And the last thing you really need is some kind of tapered end reamer, because for the bottom hole it's a bit flat usually, and you want to just take some off to raise the C sharp. Right, I've talked you through the variables and how you can alter them, and now I think the best time to show you is actually in practice by reading up this Leicestershire Smallpipe chanter, which I'll do in another video.